It has finally happened. The White House has officially confirmed that US President Donald Trump is ready to fully support the sanctions from hell against Russia, that very bill which the late Lindsey Graham considered his life's work. After 2 years of struggle, and after the author's death, the document has finally received the green light from the US President. Moreover, today, July 13, it was even toughened in the Senate with a couple of interesting points added. But here lies an inconvenient truth for Donald Trump himself, which deserves to be discussed separately and honestly. While Washington spent 2 years agreeing on the paperwork, Ukraine had already imposed its own sanctions. They're called long-range sanctions. And unlike the American ones, they are working right now and working successfully. Today, it became known that Russian oil refining has collapsed to the level seen in 2005. And Vladimir Putin himself publicly admitted for the first time. He said, quote, "Yes, Ukrainians are creating certain problems for us with oil products." In this episode, what exactly did Donald Trump support and when will it start working? Why have Ukrainian drones turned out to be more effective than American sanctions? The main question is, will Donald Trump actually sign these sanctions in the end, or is this just another attempt to scare Vladimir Putin? My name is Alexei Pechi. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel. We're moving towards the 300,000 subscriber mark. I would appreciate you subscribing. Subscribe to... So, I'm recording this episode late at night on July 13th. While unfortunately Russians are right now continuing rocket attacks on the Ukrainian capital. But this is breaking news, and it could turn out to be fatal for the Russians. A White House spokesperson told CNN that Donald Trump, after talking with Lindsey Graham before his death, is finally ready to support the bill on hellish sanctions against Russia. This is critical. It's crucial. The decision of the US president could sharply accelerate this bill's progress through Congress. Let me remind you of the mechanism itself. Lindsey Graham's bill opens the way for Donald Trump to impose high tariffs on imports from all countries that continue to buy Russian oil, uranium, and natural gas. We're talking about 5 intermediary countries that buy cheap Russian oil in order to resell it later. Or petroleum products made from Russian oil. And now there are already 85 senators co-authoring this bill. And that's enough to override a presidential veto if Trump suddenly changes his mind. But sources from the White House, of course, that's one thing. They insist that Trump has finally supported the draconian sanctions. But still, the source from the White House spoke anonymously. But today, even the Republican leader, John Thune, the leader of the Republican majority, confirmed it publicly. The White House worked closely with Lindsey Graham on the text of the final version of this bill on hellish sanctions. Next is his quote. "This requires efforts from both Democrats and Republicans in the Senate, but I hope we can get it done. This bill is Senator Graham's political legacy." Democrat Richard Blumenthal, who co-authored the bill with Lindsey Graham, framed the stakes pretty emotionally and stated, quote, "The swift passage of this bill in memory of Senator Graham should be seen as a fitting tribute." That's exactly what we talked about when I last spoke with him over the weekend. I would like to note that the current version of the harsh sanctions against Russia provides for secondary sanctions on third countries. The introduction of prohibitive tariffs of 500 on goods from countries that continue to purchase Russian energy resources, oil, uranium, and natural gas. These sanctions also provide for a financial blockade, meaning strict restrictions against the largest Russian banks and oligarchs, and an investment ban, a total ban on American investment in the Russian energy sector. Trump himself has also changed his position significantly. I'll remind you of just one episode to show how much his rhetoric has changed. On July 8, Donald Trump met with Volodymyr Zelensky at the NATO summit in Ankara, where he praised the strikes by the armed forces of Ukraine against Russia, calling them something that brings peace closer. At that time, Trump publicly stated that on the same day, July 8, he would definitely call Vladimir Putin and discuss peace negotiations with him. But then there was a closed meeting between Trump and Zelensky, and we don't know exactly what was said there, but today it's already late in the evening, July 13, and Trump still hasn't called Vladimir Putin and has even stopped mentioning his name in public discussions altogether. And here's the most important thing. Donald Trump could actually finally support the sanctions in order to jump on the winning bandwagon at the last minute, so to speak. While Washington was coordinating the text of the bill on hellish sanctions, Ukraine had already achieved a result that neither thousands of sanctions nor 4 years of diplomacy could provide. Oil refining in Russia has collapsed to less than 4 million barrels per day, which is the lowest since March 2005, meaning it's the lowest for almost the entire rule of Vladimir Putin. The drop over the year is almost 1.5 million barrels per day, and all of this is the result of Ukraine's long-range strikes. Today, the Security Service of Ukraine reported that in the last 100 days there have been about 50 attacks on Russian fuel facilities, just fuel facilities, so about every 2 days something very big gets hit somewhere. Almost all of Russia's oil refineries have already come under attack, or at least the top 10 have all been hit, and some of them more than once. And now, attention! Russia has classified the official statistics of the fuel industry. Analysts have to calculate the real losses using satellite monitoring of oil fields and storage tanks. And when the government starts hiding the numbers, that's an admission of a catastrophe. Not just a problem, but a real catastrophe. Putin, let me remind you, first boasted that the strikes on oil refineries supposedly weren't a big deal, but now he's forbidding people from telling Russians what the real situation is in oil refining. The consequences of the Ukrainian strikes started cascading in. And let me remind you that Russia imposed a complete ban on the export of gasoline, then aviation kerosene, and now diesel as well. Russia is one of the key global exporters. Diesel fuel disappeared from the market, pushing world prices to multi-year highs. Gasoline production covers only 65% of seasonal demand and the final humiliation for the oil superpower. Let me remind you, Vladimir Putin himself, if I'm not mistaken, it was 2007 or 2008, spoke there in front of the NATO members, back when he was still invited to those summits. And back then he stated, you must not forget, Russia is an energy power. It's a superpower, and you have to take that into account, otherwise you'll all freeze without Russian gas and oil. So, this oil superpower is now importing gasoline from India and Kazakhstan. And now just think about it. Russia sells its oil to India and even partly to Kazakhstan at discounts. Huge discounts. And then it's forced to buy it back from these countries. That very same Russian oil, but now at a high market price, in the form of gasoline refined from it. That's what this so-called oil superpower is like. In the end, even Vladimir Putin had to admit that there are many problems. Today, July 13, at the All for Victory People's Front Forum, Vladimir Putin did something he had been avoiding for months. Here is his quote. Yes, the Ukrainians are currently creating, as they say, certain problems for us with petroleum products. I think the situation will gradually improve. But the basic foundation of energy in Russia is very strong and reliable. What do you think about this evasion? I really like it when Russians start coming up with all sorts of convoluted wording so that this wild, somewhat dim-witted Russian never actually understands what they were trying to convey to him. So Putin says Ukrainians are creating, as they say, certain problems for us with petroleum products at the moment. Say it directly. We're in serious trouble with the fuel crisis. Real problems exist. But he keeps dodging. Then he says, well, overall, the basic foundation of our energy sector is very reliable, so I hope that in the future, basically, everything will be fine. Things will get better. But before that, Putin was forced to admit the everyday side of things too. And yet he said, quote, problems for motorists and for businesses still remain. And unfortunately, there are still lines at gas stations too. And you can't always find the right type of gasoline. And then came the threats, which reveal not strength but weakness. Vladimir Putin stomped his short little foot menacingly and declared that any negative responses would be mirrored and several times more powerful. I've already repeated 1,000,000 times that filthy Russia can't respond because it is the aggressor. To put it simply, Putin says yes, there are a lot of problems, but we'll show them now, so don't worry. And you Russians, just endure it. You've gotten used to the idea that what matters most is that your neighbors have it worse, so now we'll make things worse for them. But the fuel crisis is no longer just about the economy, it's reached the front lines, which is basically what this was all about in the first place. According to the resistance movement Atesh, the Russian command in southern Ukraine has restricted refueling for mobile fire groups and air defense units. And here I'll point out once again, just think about this vicious cycle. Ukrainian drones are striking oil refineries in Russia. Russia is gradually running out of fuel. They have nothing to refuel the air defense groups, which are supposed to shoot down these drones that are attacking the oil refineries. The drones are flying more freely and hitting more and more oil refineries, but I think this is absolutely brilliant. And the strikes don't stop. On the night of July 13, the security service of Ukraine attacked patrol boats and hangars with equipment at the Bagarovo air base in Crimea, in Port Kavkaz in the Krasnodar region, and the tank farm of the oil depot in Stavropol. The Nebo-U radar and an S-400 launcher near Kerch were hit, and in the Sea of Azov, more than a dozen ships were also on fire. These include tankers, ferries, bulk carriers, and tugboats. The result? American sanctions, the so-called hellish sanctions, may finally have a real impact. US sanctions should not target Russia, but those who give money to the Kremlin, China, India, Brazil, and in general all buyers of oil. This is a blow to the revenues that finance the war, but we will have to wait. And even when the bill is passed and Donald Trump signs it, a significant part of the sanctions will take effect automatically, but only after 30 days. Plus, it will take months for buyers to adjust their logistics. And that's why the real effect of these sanctions won't come until, I would say, winter. And that's only if Trump actually pulls the trigger. But Ukrainian sanctions work instantly. Nevertheless, that would still be the perfect combination. That is, Ukraine knocks out refining. Accordingly, Russia loses the ability to supply itself and to wage war. And the sanctions from Leningrad Crimea will knock out raw material exports, and Russia will lose money. One works without the other, of course, but only at half strength. But together, this is a real stranglehold on the Kremlin. But will Trump sign the sanctions? That's an open question. Arguments in favor: the White House has officially confirmed its readiness for the first time. The death of Lindsay Leningrad, as strange as it may sound, turned the bill into a matter of honor. Its adoption is presented as a tribute to the memory of the great senator. Arguments against: well, Trump dragged it out for years. He insisted on broader presidential powers. That is, he wanted to decide himself whether to strike or not. And most importantly, 500% tariffs will hit China and India. This already threatens to fuel inflation in the United States on the eve of the November elections. So, an honest forecast. The bill will most likely be passed. It will be passed. But there's a huge gap between passing a law and actually applying sanctions, because it will be Trump himself who personally decides whether to strike at the Kremlin or not. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. And friends, especially those in Kyiv, take care of yourselves. Take care, don't ignore the air raid signals, and be sure to go down to your shelter. To the shelter, because as long as we don't have reliable protection against Russian ballistic missiles, unfortunately Putin will try to use this leverage as much as possible. So I'll leave it at that. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.